Koto katoa. I'd like to start today's meeting by acknowledging all people who work to restore and regenerate the earth and all its living inhabitants. My name is Jonathan Williams, and I'm Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Communications at the Centre for Sustainable Finance, Toitu Tahua. I'll be hosting today's webinar on behalf of the Centre in place of our Chief Executive, Joe Kelly, who is unfortunately unable to join us today. This is the second quarterly Global Sustainable Finance briefing we've brought to you in partnership with EY. Last week, EY released their latest quarterly roundup of sustainable finance developments across the globe. We are pleased to be partnering with EY to bring you these comprehensive newsletters, which are prepared by the Oceania team under the leadership of Pip Best. But before I hand over to EY, I would like to spend a couple of minutes briefly introducing the Centre for those on the webinar who may not be so familiar with us and what we do. Our vision is an equitable, inclusive financial system that enables a resilient, sustainable Aotearoa New Zealand. We understand that this relies on access to international capital, talent and markets. Our purpose is to advance that vision by driving a financial system that is more resilient, inclusive, robust, and agile through the incorporation of environmental, social, and economic considerations in financial decisions. The Centre plays a similar role to our international counterparts, with our organisations like ours, including in Australia, Europe, UK, Singapore, ASEAN, and Canada, among others. The Centre has four key roles: as a connector, to remove barriers to the incorporation of environmental, social, and economic considerations in financial decisions; as a collaborator on policy and standards; as a catalytic convener, which sits at the heart of our approach. The Centre takes the view that, although the market will eventually come around to delivering the outcomes needed, it won't be nearly fast enough, so we need to accelerate the pace and scale of the market response to these challenges. And finally, we provide some measure of accountability to progress to the Sustainable Finance Forum's 2030 Roadmap for Action, which was an early initiative of the Aotearoa Circle and contained a number of recommendations to the government, which the Centre has continually refined since we were established in July 2021. Next slide, please. The Centre was established as a charitable trust. We are not a membership organisation or industry association. We work with the government of the day, and we're conceived in line with international models to facilitate and intermediate between various actors as an honest broker. Our work draws on the experience and expertise of our board, our partners, and a wide international network of senior finance ministers and practitioners. Good governance and international credibility are crucially important to the work we undertake, and we do not proceed with any work related to the government without deep engagement and clarity around the authorising environment for that work. Next slide, please. We are fortunate to have quite a number of partners who fund and contribute significantly to our work, and these are largely finance institutions and service providers as listed on the slide, including, of course, EY. However, from the establishment of the Centre, we have always been clear that our vision and purpose can't be achieved through private sector action alone, and this is very much a view held internationally. This year, we were very pleased to confirm a strategic partnership with the Ministry for the Environment, which provides resource to make progress on some of the key recommendations from the roadmap. Next slide, please. In establishing the partnership, we engaged with the Minister for Climate Change, the Honourable Simon Watts, to align on and confirm his priorities for sustainable finance through 2026. These priorities are establishing a sustainable finance reference group convened by the Centre, supporting development of a government sustainable finance strategy which would supplement the roadmap, advancing the development of a New Zealand sustainable finance taxonomy, accelerating innovative sustainable finance solutions in key transition sectors, and supporting the Minister in international fora, such as the annual Australia-New Zealand Climate Finance 2+2 meetings. This work is well underway, and the Centre is very appreciative of the support of our partners and other stakeholders in this ongoing programme of work. Anyway, you've heard more than enough from me, I think. Next slide, please. Turning now to today's speakers and agenda, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you today's three other speakers. Gina Morrissey, Senior Manager in EY's Climate Change and Sustainability Services team. Hannah Leckie, also in the same team as a Senior Manager and EY New Zealand's Nature Lead. And Anna Ririnui, Manager, Strategic Partnerships and International at the Ministry for the Environment. Gina will start by providing an overview of recent global sustainable finance developments. Hannah will then do a deep dive on some nature-related global developments. Then she and Anna will cover domestic nature-related developments, including biodiversity credits market framework. We have a bit of time allocated for Q&A at the end of this webinar, so should you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A chat, and we will endeavour to address them then. If we can't get through them all, we can always get back to you on those questions via email. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Gina Morrissey from EY. Over to you, Gina. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Gina Morrissey tōku ingoa. I'm the Senior Manager in the Climate Change and Sustainability team at EY. It's a pleasure to join you for the second Sustainable Finance Update webinar in collaboration with the Centre for Sustainable Finance. I'm going to give you a quick update on global and trans-Tasman sustainable finance developments based on EY's quarterly Sustainable Finance newsletter before handing across to Hannah to speak in more detail on the nature-related finance updates. To the global updates. So the first update at the COP29 UN climate conference, agreement was reached to triple finance to developing countries. Under the agreement, developed nations have agreed to triple finance to developing countries from the previous goal of US 100 billion annually to US 300 billion annually by 2035. The pledge also sets out the ambition to scale up finance to developing countries from both public and private sources to US 1.3 trillion per year by 2035. Second update, the UK's Transition Finance Market Review released the report Scaling Transition Finance, Findings of the Transition Finance Market Review. The report outlines a roadmap to establish the UK as a global transition finance hub. The roadmap is centered around three pillars, essential for scaling a robust transition finance market. 1, establishing clarity as to the scope of transition finance and credibility of the market. 2, scaling finance for transition activities. And 3, scaling finance for transitioning entities, that is, those with a credible transition strategy. The third update, the Transition Plan Task Force released its final progress report. According to the report, there has been significant progress since the launch of the Transition Plan Task Force in 2022, with an increased uptake of transition plans globally. Additionally, transition plan considerations are increasingly being included in standards and regulatory requirements around the world. For example, IFRS S2 requires companies to disclose information about their climate-related transition plans if they have one. In the UK government has pledged nearly £22 billion for carbon capture projects over the next 25 years, with projects expected to start storing captured carbon from 2028. In Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority announced a new Sustainable Finance Action Agenda, which includes 8 goals across 4 focus areas, being banking for net zero, investing in a sustainable future, financing net zero, and making sustainability more inclusive, for example, through high quality and comprehensive disclosures and education. The EU, Singapore, and China have collaborated on a multi-jurisdiction green financing taxonomy named the Multi-Jurisdiction Common Ground Taxonomy. It will enhance interoperability of taxonomies across the EU, China, and Singapore, and serve as a reference for jurisdictions that are developing their own green taxonomies, with the ultimate aim to increase the number of taxonomies that are interoperable and help facilitate cross-border green capital flows. The last global update before I move across to the Trans-Tasman updates. The 2024 Living Planet report from WWF has highlighted the major funding gaps for climate, biodiversity, and sustainable development goals, and suggests that redirecting just 7.7% of current finance flows into activities that are contributing to climate change and nature loss would plug these gaps. To the next slide and our Trans-Tasman updates. The Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards, AASB S1 and S2, have been approved and issued, mandating climate-related reporting as early as financial years beginning on or after the 1st of January 2025 for some entities, with general sustainability disclosures being only voluntary at this stage. The standards are based on IFRS S1 and S2 issued by the International Sustainability Standards Board, with the main difference being that industry-based metrics or disclosure topics are not required under AASB S2. In New Zealand, the XRB has approved 3 out of the 4 proposals related to amendments to the New Zealand climate standards. A 1-year extension has been provided for the adoption provisions relating to Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions disclosures, Scope 3 greenhouse gas assurance, and also financial impact disclosures. The proposal to delay transition planning by an additional year was not adopted. The Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability has been signed between New Zealand, Costa Rica, Iceland, and Switzerland. It opens opportunities to New Zealand's economy while addressing climate change and sustainability challenges. The agreement removes tariffs on key exports, going further than traditional trade agreements by including natural renewable products such as wool in the list of environmental goods. There have also been a number of finance developments relating to nature, including the establishment of a coalition to scale climate and conservation outcomes using sovereign debt swaps at COP16 in Cali. But I will leave you with Hannah, who will talk to the more significant updates in this space. Thanks, Hannah.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Hannah Leckie tupuinga. My name's Hannah. I'm a senior manager in the climate change and sustainability team here at EY New Zealand, and I'm also our nature lead for developments on nature in New Zealand at EY. I'm happy to present a deep dive on recent nature-related global developments. My key message here is that finance for nature is woefully inadequate, both in New Zealand and globally. And then after this deep dive, I'm going to present some key findings and recommendations from a report that EY and Ministry for Environment have worked on together on how we can better attract investors to scale up finance for nature in Aotearoa. Next slide, please. So this slide's got quite a few stats on here. They're all quite alarming. I will just pick out a few. 69% reduction in global wildlife since 1970. That's been driven by habitat loss, pollution, overexploitation of natural resources and climate change. And this is leading to an unprecedented species extinction rates and the degradation of ecosystems. And unfortunately, New Zealand's not immune to this challenge in these stats. There's some more stats there in the middle column. The cost of inaction weighs on companies and governments. So we've got approximately 55% of global GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature, but a vastly higher share than that relies on functioning ecosystems to some degree. Nature-related risks are costing companies and their investors billions of dollars, but many lack sophistication in their approach to managing these risks. I'd also point out that at least 70% of New Zealand's export earnings are dependent on nature. The World Economic Forum ranks biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse in the top 3 threats to humanity over the next 10 years. There is a significant shortfall in funding needs to effectively restore and conserve biodiversity worldwide. Bloomberg estimates that global financial flows for biodiversity need to increase by 5-fold by 2030. So there is this significant shortfall in funding, and you may be aware that in New Zealand we have the $1.2 billion Jobs for Nature program, but that funding is coming to an end at the end of this year. which will leave a significant gap in funding for nature-related projects in Aotearoa. And then lastly, on the slide, I just wanted to highlight that there is no net zero without nature. Biodiversity is our strongest natural defence against climate change, and it's Aotearoa's largest financial asset. Limiting global temperatures to well below 2 degrees is not possible without reversing nature loss and enhancing nature-based carbon sinks. And at the same time, protecting and restoring nature is not possible without ambitious global and local action on climate change. Next slide, please. The urgency to address nature loss is increasingly capturing the attention of a range of stakeholders, including investors, communities, and customers. This has led to the emergence of global frameworks aimed at guiding nature risk assessments, reporting, and target setting. The three main regulations driving this change are the Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted by the COP on biological diversity, and that aims to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, and it encourages national biodiversity strategies and aligned financial flows. We also see the ISSB and the nature disclosures, and this is leading to standardised sustainability reporting, integrating frameworks from also the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures. And then thirdly, we're seeing the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures. This is helping guide businesses in assessing and reporting nature-related impacts and risks across the whole value chain. Similar to the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures, the TNFD follows a similar structure with disclosure pillars on governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And good news, last month we saw that Littleton Port Company here in Christchurch became the first New Zealand company to publicly report its nature-related risks and dependencies. And they've used the TNFD approach in their reporting here. I've also included on this slide a link to other companies globally who have voluntarily adopted the TNFD framework. And for those interested, I've also included a link to the TNFD draft guidance on nature transition planning. Next slide, please. So there's been a couple of recent major global events on nature. The first one was the Global Nature Positive Summit that was held in early October in Sydney, and it was a prelude to the Biodiversity COP. Given Australia was a host country, there was a number of mentionable announcements from the Australian government. The first was the launch of the Nature Positive Matters, which is an initiative to help businesses and organisations embed nature into economic decision-making. The second was the announcement of 23 Australian companies committing to report on their nature-related risks and impacts in alignment with the TNFD. Thirdly, Australia has agreed to participate in the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, which is about reducing abandoned fishing gear in the sea, and they've committed 1.4 million in investment to reduce abandoned fishing gear in the Arafua and Timor seas. And then finally, Australia also announced the expansion of the Heard and McDonald Islands Marine Reserve by expanding that by an additional 310,000 kilometres squared. Anna might want to elaborate on this, but I think there was a sense that New Zealand is far behind Australia in terms of action on biodiversity. And the summit highlighted the need for stronger commitments, increased financial support, greater inclusion of marginalised communities, and better integration of climate and biodiversity strategies to achieve meaningful and lasting conservation outcomes. Just a bit of a pitch for EY, we launched a report with WWF at the summit that others on this call might be interested in. It's called Nature Positive Aotearoa, and the report provides the economic case for protecting nature in New Zealand. And that in doing so, Aotearoa can save more than $270 billion over the next 50 years. Next slide, please. So the Nature Positive Summit was closely followed by the 16th COP to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and that was held in Cali, Colombia, 21st of October to 1st of November. The focus of COP16 was on translating ambition to a nature positive transition, and the theme was peace with nature. There was unprecedented attendance and engagement from businesses, financial institutions, and civil society. Some of the key outcomes of COP16 included a landmark first UN environmental process to create a subsidiary body for Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge, an agreement to map ecologically and biologically significant marine areas. There was a real focus on integrating both climate and nature agendas. 6 global environmental organizations announced the formation of a coalition to scale climate and conservation outcomes using sovereign debt conversions. Debt for climate and debt for nature swaps can be used to unlock resources needed to conserve vital ecosystems. For example, Indonesia has recently signed a deal with the US to reduce its debt payments or debt repayments by $35 million over the next 9 years, and to instead redirect those payments towards reef conservation. We also saw at the COP 500 plus organisations commit to voluntarily disclosing through the TNFD. It is clear that 2 years post the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework that biodiversity really does continue to rise on the corporate agenda with or without government mandates. So in saying that there more ambitious action is needed from governments in order to match the gravity of the biodiversity crisis. Through COP16, we saw that only 22% of governments submitted strategies for the Global Biodiversity Framework implementation, and only 18 countries, led by Colombia and Mexico, championed implementation across all sectors of their economy. There has been a lack of action from governments on harmful subsidies. There is a target to redirect $0.5 trillion by 2030. But yes, there's been a lack of action on that regard. There's also been some insufficient progress made towards protecting 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean areas by 2030, which is a key target under the Global Biodiversity Framework. And then, as I mentioned before, a continuing trend here that finance for biodiversity remains woefully inadequate. According to WWF, COP16 saw just $163 million in funding for biodiversity committed, and that's in comparison to the US $200 billion estimated to be needed to reverse nature loss by 2030. Negotiations for the establishment of a wider new global fund for nature to direct funding towards developing countries was suspended. COP17 will be held in Armenia in 2026, and that's an important milestone because it's the midpoint between the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework and 2030, which is that cutoff year for the 23 targets under that framework. Next slide, please. This is my last slide on the deep dive update. We have seen that private sector investment can make a significant contribution to nature repair. Australia's nature repair market is expected to be the world's first legislated national voluntary biodiversity market. Over time, market demand for nature-related projects in Australia is expected to increase. This is expected to be driven by investment, driven by reporting and disclosure requirements such as the TNFD. Also philanthropic, environmental, social and corporate governance motivated investment, and carbon market participants seeking projects which also benefit nature. And there's no reason to think that we don't have those same demands in New Zealand too. The Australian Nature Repair Act of 2023 paves the way for a marketplace to open in 2025, where individuals and organisations can benefit financially from nature repair projects that generate tradable certificates. The idea is that the market would be accessible to most people and groups, including First Nations people, and organisations, conservation groups, and farmers. Projects may restore or protect water or land areas in Australia. For example, eligible projects include re-establishing vegetation along waterways and keeping pests and feral species from destroying native species and ecosystems. The way it will work will mean that nature repair market project participants can apply for a biodiversity certificate, which can then be sold to generate income. A single certificate would be issued for each project, and the certificates would describe the biodiversity benefits from each project in a consistent way. Currently, the government is developing rules and methods to help with this nature repair market, and that will include things like reporting, notification, record keeping, project monitoring, Indigenous-led methods. And interestingly, they're also developing biodiversity assessment instruments to help support the consistency in how projects describe biodiversity improvements, and a prototype calculator that determines the monetary value of restoration contributions. And then just a final recent update, whilst this biodiversity market is intended to go live in 2025, at the end of last month, Prime Minister Albanese's decision to shelve the Nature Positive Laws and Environmental Protection Agency is likely to delay environmental reforms for this nature repair market. And this decision from the Prime Minister is likely influenced by his re-election concerns. Australia's election is in May next year, and in an attempt to avoid opposition criticism and pressure from Western Australia's mining sector. That's it from me on the deep dive on nature-related global updates. If we take the next slide, please. I'm just going to take a few minutes to present some findings from a report that we're actually launching today. So we know that uncertainties in long-term financing and funding streams driven by a lack of secure, direct financial returns for nature-related projects is putting at risk achieving both our domestic and international biodiversity objectives. So the Ministry for Environment commissioned EY to provide insights and recommendations to MFE on how to help scale investment into nature-related outcomes in Aotearoa. This involved us researching investment characteristics of different types of investors, the creation of an investor needs framework, a decision tree to match investor types against different types of nature-related project characteristics, and the application of our findings to New Zealand environmental projects. I just quickly want to say it's been a pleasure working with Anna, Kate, and the rest of the Ministry for Environment team on this project. Thank you. And I also wanted to give some credit to Pip Best, who led this project, and to Grace Max and Lily Morrow, who undertook much of the research. As I mentioned, the report's being launched today, and I'll just spend the next few minutes talking through some of the recommendations we provided to the Ministry for Environment. Next slide, please. So we found that capital from New Zealand investors into nature-related projects is currently scarce, with a limited appetite for sacrificing financial returns. And also that New Zealand lags behind international peers in developing infrastructure for nature-related investment revenue models. So EY has identified 4 models to transform nature-related projects into an investable structure in New Zealand. The first 2 of these models are focused on companies. So the first one here is valuing ecosystem service improvements. This is when companies dependent on ecosystem services see shared value in enhancing those ecosystem services that they're reliant on. And accordingly, they undertake nature-related projects directly or pay a company to do so on their behalf. And in turn, other investors may finance these companies' nature-related projects through debt and equity instruments with the company to help support their investment in ecosystem services. The second model I wanted to highlight here is nature-positive companies. This is when companies may adopt nature-positive strategies and invest in nature-related projects for the perceived strategic advantage. For example, their branding, financial advantage, or social responsibility, which can then often allow them to charge a premium for their products. Nature-related projects become investable as companies invest in projects to fulfill their nature-positive goals, which in turn opens opportunities through debt and equity in these companies. As part of this project, we developed a nature-related investor decision tree, which is there on the right of your screen, to help nature-related project proponents narrow down investor types depending on their project characteristics. And once a project proponent has narrowed down their focus on who may be appropriate to invest, they can then develop project-specific investment material to cater for those investors' needs. I won't go through this decision tree in detail, just to highlight that the investment models I've just talked you through open up new additional investor interest, as shown in the yellow dashed lines on the chart there. Next slide, please. The other two models focus on developing crediting systems, which can then provide potential nature-related revenue stream and can make projects themselves investable. So the first of those two is expanding the New Zealand emissions trading scheme to include nature-based removals, allowing a financial value of nature outcomes to be integrated with the climate outcomes. The idea here is that nature-related projects become investable through providing a new revenue stream associated with the carbon sequestered. Additional investor types may be interested in investing for corporate compliance reasons or for the long-term appreciation of carbon credits. And then the last model is establishing biodiversity credit markets. Establishing a market could be done on a voluntary basis with no regulated demand, or it could be regulated linked to legal requirements or consents. The idea here is that nature-related projects become investable through providing a new revenue stream attached to volume of nature-related outcomes. And additional investor types may be interested in investing for corporate compliance reasons or long-term appreciation of credits. And again, the nature-related investor decision tree there on your right just points out how these investment models can open up additional investor interest, as shown by the yellow dotted lines. Next slide, please. So the last part of my presentation is just talking through some of the recommendations we developed for Ministry for Environment. There are 3 sets. One is enabling actions, 2 is regulatory actions, and 3 is government financing activities. The recommendations have been provided to MFE, although responsibility for acting on or carrying out these recommendations may sit with other government departments or government partners as intermediaries. In terms of the enabling actions, there's a few recommendations here, but in the essence of time, I'll just highlight a few. The first one I wanted to highlight is aggregating smaller nature-based projects into diversified portfolios to meet investor size criteria and attract a broader range of investors. So many of New Zealand's environmental projects are quite small in scale, and by aggregating some projects, they can create a diverse portfolio that balances risk and return for different types of investors. For instance, bundling of multiple small projects into one larger project will be more likely to meet the minimum investment size of certain investors. And MFE could facilitate or work with a group such as the Nature Alliance or the Centre for Sustainable Finance to consolidate small-scale initiatives into larger, more attractive investment opportunities. The second recommendation I wanted to highlight was creating a Getting Investment Ready tool to help project developers tailor information to meet diverse investor needs. This could look like a pamphlet or an online guide or platform to help bridge the information gap between project developers and investors. And it could serve as a guide for project developers to tailor their project information to appeal to a broader range of investors and their investor needs. For example, this could look like a borrower using carbon credits as collateral to receive upfront payments similar to a loan. Next slide, please. So there's some key regulatory actions and government financing actions I'd like to highlight. Firstly, New Zealand could consider integrating high integrity nature-based projects such as wetlands into the emissions trading scheme, much like I said before. But just to qualify that doing so, the ETS would need to fully consider how any additional supply of New Zealand units would impact the ability of New Zealand to reach its emissions targets, and how the supply or this additional supply would impact the price of carbon. The second there is to consider establishing a market for biodiversity, much like Australia is. As I said before, it could be voluntary or regulatory, and creating a market for biodiversity credits has the potential to significantly increase investment in nature by generating credits that represent a certain unit of nature-related outcome. The last regulatory recommendation I wanted to highlight was around encouraging natural capital reporting, and by mandating disclosures and encouraging the uptake of the TNFD reporting framework. This would drive heightened corporate awareness in New Zealand of the value of nature and increase the uptake of nature-positive business practices and investments. And then just finishing off with these government financing activities, creating a blended finance investment vehicle to mitigate risks and attract private investors by absorbing high-risk positions would be great. Creating blended financing vehicles like this help to absorb higher risk positions by their design, and this attracts investors who are seeking investments that fall within market standard risk and return parameters for that investor type. And then the last one there is develop grant programs or public-private partnerships to fund pre-feasibility studies, aiding the initiation of projects and the innovation, particularly in nascent markets. That's it from me. Thank you for listening. The full summary report is available on EY's website as of today. And now I'll pass on to Anna Ririnui of MFE, who has some exciting information to share on the development of biodiversity credit market framework in Aotearoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui Hannah and the team at the Centre for facilitating this focus on investment in natural capital. I'm the manager of the Strategic Partnerships and International team at MFE. My contribution today is to provide a really quick context setting and overview, and to update you on one of the enabling actions recognised in the report outlined by Hannah just now, some exploratory work on a biodiversity nature credits market framework. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just recapping firstly, as we've heard from the EY team, environmental risk is economic risk, and environmental risk includes nature risk. And of course, risk creates opportunities. We're seeing this play out through trade agreements impacting our exporters, shifts in consumer demand, access to capital and social licence. But those of you on this call know that perhaps better than anyone. 40% of New Zealand's exports by value are going to countries with carbon border adjustment mechanisms in place or proposed. Not all markets are equal, but there is now ESG regulation in every region. Much like carbon action, multinationals, their supply chains and capital providers are looking at investment opportunities relating to nature. Our policy settings noted here and other work include regulatory and non-regulatory levers bringing climate and nature together. Next slide, please. The nature investor preference work Hannah has just talked us through highlighted a range of enabling and regulatory insights to scale the flow of capital into protecting and restoring our natural environment and the biodiversity it supports. Fundamentally, it recognises the system requires strong demand, system integrity, appropriate checks and balances, and high quality of supply of investable projects. This slide is pretty simplistic, but illustrates that idea and indicates biodiversity or nature credits market, circled here in red, as one mechanism alongside others. The government is exploring a BCM as a potential opportunity to level up incentives for private enterprise to invest in nature and take some of the onus off regulating private landowners and to ultimately help halt and turn around biodiversity loss. I'll provide briefly a bit more information on the BCM work as we are referring to it. Next slide, please. So, as Hannah mentioned, biodiversity credits are emerging internationally as one tool to support the conservation and restoration of biodiversity by effectively connecting demand for nature investment of high integrity and transparency to impact on the ground. As we've heard, UK is leading with Australia's nature repair market following. So we've been tasked with working up a conceptual BCM framework. I just wanted to give a little bit of clarity in case you are wondering what we mean by biodiversity credit. The internationally based definition we're using is a certificate that represents a measured and evidence-based unit of positive biodiversity outcome that is durable and additional to what would have otherwise occurred. For example, Spain's climate trade and Colombia's Terrasos are promoting voluntary biodiversity credits to support habitat banking. Each credit corresponds to 30 years of conservation and restoration of 10 metres of habitat of threatened species. Credit generation is determined by the International Union for Conservation of Nature's, it's IUCN's, threat category for the ecosystem, and enables purchasers to make clearly validated nature-positive contributions. So as this slide outlines, the key market framework design principles we're working to include a framework that is private sector-driven, government-endorsed, that's interoperable with carbon markets, recognising carbon as the more mature and familiar market. High integrity, treaty consistent, so they reflect our place, and internationally aligned so that New Zealand products don't look too weird to international buyers. Needs to be accessible to landowners, flexible and pragmatic, easy to transact, and ultimately cost neutral for government. The credit markets design thinking has been informed by feedback from consultation, thank you if that was you, market developments in other countries, insights from the report outlined today, and the convergence of international thinking around what principles should guide high integrity markets, such as the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity's framework for high integrity markets. So, subject to minister direction, we're looking to work with project proponents and market participants to test and refine components of the framework design. Essentially, the overarching intention is to ensure that what is said to be in the tin is in the tin, and that bad operators don't undermine the confidence of the market or undermine the work of good operators. And timing-wise, we are presenting this work back to ministers in the coming weeks, and we will take direction from there. So I trust that that provides a very quick summary of one aspect of the work that Hannah outlined to better align investor interests and ecological needs. So handing back to Jonathan now, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. So we have a bit of time at the end of this call allocated to Q&A. I haven't seen any questions through on the Q&A chat yet, but if you do have any questions, please do feel free to send them through there, and we'll endeavour to respond. As there don't seem to be any questions coming, I hope we've answered them all for you. So I think we'll wrap up the Q&A session there. I just want to provide a few final updates from me from the centre. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to sign up for news and updates from the Centre for Sustainable Finance via our homepage. If you go to the homepage and scroll down the bottom, there's a form you can fill in there. We have recorded this webinar, so we will share a recording with our Centre for Sustainable Finance community, as well as those who have registered for this call. We'll send that out next week. So signing up with us will ensure you receive this webinar recording. We look forward to welcoming our partners to our last quarterly partners meeting at the Deloitte Centre on Monday, the 9th of December from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. And in the week commencing the 16th of December, we'll be sending out our end-of-year wrap to the centre's community, which will include, among other things, updates on the government sustainable finance strategy, the New Zealand Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, and also the start of a 10 simplified ESG metrics for SMEs guide, which we prepared in collaboration with another of our partners, KPMG, and launched on the 30th of October. I hope you've come across that, but if you haven't, that's also on our website, along with a recording of a webinar that we presented when we launched the guide. On behalf of the Centre, I would like to thank you all for making the time to join us for this webinar today, despite the busy time of year. Have a good rest of your day. Kia pai tō kotora.